So you came across a great idea, spent months building on a product, only to find that no one wants to buy it. So what do you do now? In this episode, we're going to discuss the steps you need to take to understand whether your idea solves a compelling problem for a defined set of customers before wasting a bunch of time and money, and we're going to cover a whole lot more. I'm Stephen White, and this is Building Lean. Hey there, awesome founders. Welcome back once again to Building Lean, our series of workshops that cover the steps and activities your startup must take to build key business functions to sustainably generate revenues. Not only are our workshops inspired by thought leaders on startup and scale methodologies, but we also share our experience as founders as well as working with hundreds of startups and our research distilling the reasons why over 160 funded startups failed. And that's not all. Of course, we have Shafiq, and he's patiently waiting nearby to join us immediately after this workshop to answer your burning startup questions related to how you build your startup lean. If you're interested in growing your startup by building lean, please subscribe to this YouTube channel and click that notification bell nearby so you can receive the latest insights that will help you avoid mistakes that cost you time and money. Over the past 5 episodes, we explored the Founder's Journey framework and the 5 related key business assumptions. Now we're going to shift gears by moving past the underlying theory of your business assumptions by breaking down each of them into milestones related to each startup phase that tie directly back into those assumptions. As I previously covered during episode 1 and 2 of the Building Lean series, as you grow your startup, it will go through 3 distinct phases, each of which reflects the traction your business is gaining. In fact, each phase reflects an increase in the value of your business as you reduce the risk that your startup could fail due to a fatal flaw with your idea. Look, while I'm absolutely sure that there may be other ways of looking at this stuff, these distinct phases are useful to you because as a founder, you're focused on different activities depending on the phase of your business. So let's just keep it simple. Now, over the remaining 9 episodes of Season 1 of Building Lean, we're going to focus on the activities and milestones related to the first 2 startup phases, beginning with the market validation phase. So let's look in detail at the things that we do and don't do as founders, and we're going to look at those in detail related to this first startup phase. So as an example, during market validation, you can ignore all of the crossed out activities and only focus on the remaining ones in the order indicated. And that means that you will first try to sell your solution by only describing its benefits, and only then would you try to build a functional prototype and test that prototype. Now, this may be have self-evident reasons, but the key is that if you don't achieve market validation, why bother spending all that time and all that money on any of those other activities if you have no way forward? So, before I begin to drill down into the milestones you need to achieve during market validation, let's have a quick refresher with a crisp definition of what comprises the market validation startup phase. Simply enough, market validation is where you prove that your startup idea is market viable, meaning that your business has the ability to attract customers, generate revenue, and deliver a quality product or service. It's that basic. With each startup development phase, there are milestones that guide you to know whether you've completed a given phase. Let's take market validation, since that's what we're starting out with, and its 5 milestones as our first example. During milestone 1, you'll find a compelling problem that your target customers want solved, not just some nuisance or inconvenience that most people would live with or even tolerate. During milestone 2, you'll discover a channel where you can engage and activate your target customers. During milestone 3, you'll determine the price that lots of customers are willing to profitably pay for your product or service. During milestone 4, you'll identify the key value differentiators your solution delivers that delight and retains your customers, especially in light of developing competition. And finally, during milestone 5, you'll determine the feasibility to scale your business in a sustainable, profitable way that also keeps you ahead of competitors. For this episode of Building Lean, we're focused on the first milestone, finding a compelling problem. Now, I want to recognize what we all already know. Whether you're watching this episode as it premieres or at some point in the near future, we are living in an unparalleled time. Regardless of what your startup idea is, your customers have been affected in terms of either their health, wealth, or both. In addition to the uncertainty regarding how the virus threatens our own personal well-being, as we can see from these two slides from McKinsey and Company, there is uncertainty regarding the timing and strength of an economic recovery, as well as the long-term impact related to necessary health-related social distancing restrictions. With all of this going on, as a founder, you must be asking yourself, what should my startup do during a time of such substantial uncertainty? A reasonable question indeed. Now, we have lived in times of uncertainty before, even if that uncertainty had more to do with open-ended distresses related to, say, war, financial markets, or societal unrest. While those instances are different in nature to what we're experiencing now, the upside of current events is that there's a discrete outcome that we're all looking for related to testing capacity, treatment availability, and eventually vaccine production. So let's shift our attention for a moment to understanding whether now is the right time to build your startup. What do each of these well-known companies have in common? You may already know the answer. Each launched during a recession, depression, or even a financial panic. Through the darkness, doubt, and uncertainty, founders still proceeded forward to launch their businesses, with the key being that they became more focused than before at building a company that had the necessary rigor to overcome, survive, and thrive through the uncertainty they were facing at the time of launching their business. So the question facing you is this: are you taking the necessary steps to build your business on a solid foundation? And for that matter, are you focused on proving that your startup idea is market viable before wasting your hard-earned resources and savings to build a product or service when you don't know whether your target customer wants it or not? And one more question. Do you know how you'll build your operational engines so you can sustainably grow your business to stay ahead of competitors? Look back at those logos. None of those of the founders of these businesses were born with some special genes or magical insights. Instead, they took the steps that we're about to cover to build a kick-ass business that could survive the bad times and thrive in the good ones. Which is why we're focused right now on the first milestone, market validation, which is the foundation for every successful business. So before we jump into determining how to find the compelling problem your customers want to pay you to solve, let's first understand what a compelling problem is. A compelling problem is one that, number one, cannot be easily solved by your customers on their own. Number two, occurs frequently when the customer is trying to complete a specific task. And number three, existing alternatives are clearly deficient in solving one or more problem dimensions comprising time, money, quality, or completeness, which makes the problem a costly one for your target customers to experience. As I mentioned just a few moments ago, people will live and tolerate nuisances and inconveniences. However, a compelling problem will cause someone to change their behavior or routine, especially when they discover a solution to their compelling problem. It's this attribute that makes a compelling problem a critical building block for your business, since you don't have the luxury of begging, convincing, wishing, or hoping that your customers will change their habit to purchase and use your product or service. There are 4 dimensions that you can use to determine whether you found a compelling problem. These dimensions are measured against how your target customer solves their compelling problem currently. Those dimensions relate to monetary cost, time cost, quality cost, and incompleteness cost. In other words, when your target customer solves their compelling problem currently, that solution is either too costly or too slow or of poor quality, or even it's just incomplete, as in it requires pulling together multiple extra elements or steps to make the solution work. I want to make this clear. Understanding the problem you're solving for your customer is essential to building a thriving business, as it helps you find new customers who experience the same problem, which reduces your sales cycle time while providing you focus to define an appropriate solution to solve your customer's compelling problem. Even if you've previously found the compelling problem that your customer wants solved, you still need to understand how your target customer's problem may have shifted due to social distancing or changes in their behaviors due to current events. So let's take an example. If your customer's compelling problem relates to how much time they must spend to plan a family vacation, this may have shifted in this current reality to how much time they must spend to plan a safe family vacation. When it comes to developing your solution, this insight is important as you need to conform to changes in customer demand, which affects problem-solution fit. As a matter of fact, based on shifts in your customer's problem, you may end up modifying your sales process by adding a new financing capability to enable a customer to pay for their solution over time rather than all at once. Now, I do want to recognize a question and a comment that Shafiq and I often hear, which is, why do I need to find out what problem my customer needs solved before I build my solution? They'll know how I help them when they experience my product or service. Or the other thing we hear is, look guys, I already have an awesome idea for a product or service that I know everyone will love. In both cases, people will cite examples like Facebook or Apple's iPhone as they tell us that nobody knew they needed Facebook or an iPhone until they experienced them first. This all seems kind of logical, right? Well, this skips in a critical economic theory about how successful businesses scale by solving a problem once and then selling that solution over and over and over to many people who suffer from the exact same problem. By identifying many people with the same problem, you can avoid building one-off solutions with little market demand. Now, before I dive into the activities for completing this milestone, let's look at a couple of examples of companies who didn't find a compelling problem for their product or service and what happened to them. In 2011, just as Netflix's streaming service was beginning to take off, CEO Reed Hastings hit upon a plan to wring out more money from consumers who wanted to continue receiving DVDs in the mail, a la the service's original process. So what was his solution? Well, it was to rebrand their mailing option as a separate company called Qwikster and require users to register and pay for both services separately. It was absolutely a PR nightmare, which led to the idea being dropped within mere weeks. So why did Netflix fail so miserably given how innovative it is as a company? The leadership's team idea was not solving their customer's problem. They were trying to solve their own business problem. And when you compared their new offering to their old offering, the new offering wanted you to take extra steps to pay them more than what you were already getting from them from your existing service. So let's look at one more example of a product that failed when attempting to address their target customer's compelling problem. In 2013, Burger King attempted to court new consumers seeking healthier fast food options with a revamped French fry offering called Sass Fries. Execution fell flat, with consumers reporting that Sass Fries had a tougher outer coating and a drier texture. So why did Burger King fail? In this case, it had really good research that its customers wanted healthy solutions. And for that matter, Burger King even knew that its customers didn't like healthy solutions to taste worse than their regular fries. Instead of offering an equivalent product that was healthier, Burger King offered a worse product. In just a few minutes, I'm going to analyze the flaws that Netflix and Burger King encountered in each scenario and the corrective actions they should have taken to avoid each failure. So that now that we understand why solving a compelling problem is essential for product success, let's look at all the different methods you could use to find compelling problems. But first, there are many methods for doing customer discovery. While all but one or really two are effective when you're trying to achieve market validation of your idea, you need to familiarize yourself with each of the alternatives. There are numerous ways to survey your customers to begin with. You got Wufoo forums, Google forums, in-person polls, email surveys, the list goes on. And all of these are handy, quick, and tempting. The downside is that while you're collecting data, the depth of that data isn't rich enough to truly validate your assumptions. Plus, even well-designed surveys encounter bias in question formulation and interpretation of the data. You're going to want to save the use of surveys for when you're attempting to scale feedback around very specific questions, rather than doing it during market or customer discovery portion of market validation. Now, as another option, focus groups. Focus groups are often presented as a simple way to have a facilitator ask key questions of lots of your potential customers, all while you're able to observe the process. Not only are focus groups quite expensive for your startup, they often experience groupthink. Just for yourself, just simply recall any recent meeting that you've had with a dominant personality or two that overwhelmed the more quiet meeting participants. Well, the same is true for focus groups. All right, another option, market research. Market research often is an entrepreneur's exercise of searching for the data that validates what you believe. And don't get me wrong, you sometimes get encouragement to go out and read research reports from Forrester, Gartner, IDC, and all of which can be awesome in understanding market trends and expert analysis. And frankly, you'd hear it from investors and advisors that that's what you should do. Here's the thing. Googling customers to discover their interests will never be the same as meeting with them in person and seeing what real customers do. Another option, observing your customers. And observing your customers is an intriguing validation tool. When we discuss customer segmentation related to early adopters, we'll explore how to use externally observable behaviors then, because it really does come in handy. While observation is helpful in gaining a basic understanding of the problem your customer wants solved, observation alone is a poor substitute for customer conversations because your observation provides very few insights into your customer's emotions and the channels in which they're searching for alternative solutions. You have to be able to get into the customer's head. And that leaves us with customer interviews. The magic of speaking with your customers is that you'll be able to gain personal insights to their problems and needs. Remember, customers think about buying solutions to problems they're experiencing and not think about products to buy. Without understanding how your customer thinks about their problems, hearing their words and feeling their emotions, how do you expect to deliver a product that could solve their problem? Think about your own purchasing experience. How often do you buy products or services based on problems that you have? Even on a whim or impulse, it's highly likely that you had a reason, even if it's just in the back of your mind. Now, what about the product you choose that spoke to you over all the other alternatives? See, it's that last point that is often missed by new entrepreneurs. They don't communicate why their solution is better than all the other solutions for their specific customer segment. And the only way to know what their customer's looking for is by actually talking to those customers. So, as a quick summary, the two best methods during market validation are customer interviews and direct observation. When it comes to finding a compelling problem for your startup idea, you need to have a plan in place to measure whether you're on track with hitting your goals. We use a technique called OKR. OKR stands for Objective and Key Results, and it's a framework for setting and measuring goals and the results of the activities to achieve them. The process was pioneered by Andy Grove, Intel's CEO, who really grew that business, and it was mainstreamed for startups by John Doerr, the famous VC and chairman of Kleiner Perkins. Now, John Doerr, if you're not familiar with him, he was the first venture investors in many well-known startups, ones such as Amazon, DoorDash, Google, Intuit, Slack, Square, Twitter, Uber, and I'm running out of fingers here, and many more. Look, while we'll discuss OKRs further in a future Building Lean episode, for now, we strongly recommend John's book, Measure What Matters, as it chronicles the application of OKRs within many startups across a variety of industries, including most famously at Google, where OKRs were applied within 1 year of its founding and remain a core regular activity for each of its over 100,000 employees. So for this first milestone of finding a compelling problem, we've designed a 21-day OKR that keeps you focused on completing the activities necessary to complete the milestone within 3 weeks. The key results correspond directly with your progress on the underlying work plan. So now let's review what your execution cycle should be. Since we've already done all the hard work by building a project guide, I'm going to use that as a reference point for this episode. Now, the key aspect is, as you begin each activity, you need to plan your work so that it can be completed in manageable, bite-sized chunks. This prevents the feeling of being overwhelmed in the work ahead or discouraged when you encounter a small setback. Once you've made your activity plan, then using the framework, tools, and process guides that I'm about to cover, you'll work on each activity in an orderly manner, which will keep you focused and on target. After completing all the activities for a given milestone, you need to schedule time to review your results with an advisor. Your advisor can help you with a fresh pair of eyes to quickly determine if you found a compelling problem or not. It's really essential to get that outside perspective. In this last step of your execution cycle, you need to determine whether your idea suffers from a fatal flaw related to a compelling problem. If you have advisors who are well-versed in lean methodologies, then they should be able to help you perform this fatal flaw analysis. Okay, now that you understand your execution cycle, let's look at the detailed activities related to finding your customer's compelling problem. Since you already have an idea in mind, you'll begin by developing a problem hypothesis based on your startup idea. This simple activity documents the problem that you intend to solve, who has that problem, as well as when and or where your target customer experiences that problem. When engaging with your customers, your problem hypothesis will keep you focused on listening to their needs rather than telling them all about your potential solution. Don't worry, you'll have plenty of time later to tell your potential customers about your product or service. It's not the time now, that's the key. Now, if you have not already thought of a specific startup idea, the problem hypothesis will enable you to identify everyday, compelling problems around you that are worth solving and problems that you have a relationship to. Once you've identified a problem worth solving, it's time to interview people that you believe suffer from this problem to determine whether their experience with the problem matches your hypothesis. Remember, we covered this way back in episode 1 and 2. You need to make an unknown problem known before you build your solution. This means that you'll need to find where the people who have the problem convene so you can reach them directly for interviews, which can happen live in person or even over the phone. Hey, it's COVID world. You got to be scrappy. Using the externally observable behavior map, you'll determine how to best find your target market fast. From there, you'll follow an interview script that gets your prospective customer in recall mode as they describe recent situations where they've experienced the problem, the negative emotions related to that experience, and how they went about solving it, and what they liked or didn't like about their solution, and how they found out about their current solution. While you're principally interested in your customer's description of the problem to determine if you found a compelling problem, the answers to these additional recall questions will be essential in building your lead engine, your sales engine, and deciding what features and functions to build in your initial product or service. Also, a planned interview script will keep you from asking what if questions, talking about your product or service, or creating confirmation bias that will result in misleading insights. After your initial set of 20 interviews, these answers will enable you to smartly revise your problem hypothesis based on real customer insights. This iterative process will allow you to quickly identify a market opportunity and quantify the primary pain that your customers are experiencing. Since it's unlikely that you'll have perfectly constructed your problem hypothesis the first time, you'll update your customer interview script to reflect the revised problem based on what you've learned and the insights you've gained. You'll then seek out new prospective customers to interview about their past experience, once again, related to the updated problem that you've hypothesized. The number of people you interview in each iteration and the number of iterations will be based on the percentage of customers that confirm they experienced the problem in the way that you've identified. In other words, if, say, only 5 to 10% of interview subjects express that they have the identified problem, then you'll likely restart your interview process with either a new batch of 20 interviews or you'll revamp your problem hypothesis altogether. Now, if 50% of the people you've interviewed confirm the problem, you may only need to interview 5 to 10 additional people to ensure that you have a representative sample size rather than, say, just getting lucky. Integrating this data-driven interview process into your startup's culture will instill a sense of discovery and openness that will keep your team focused on solving real problems for real customers rather than fighting over their own ideas or debating whether an imaginary customer has an issue or not. Once you've confirmed your problem hypothesis through customer interviews, you'll perform an existing alternative analysis. Since you asked your interview subjects how they previously solved the compelling problem you've identified, you'll take the top 2 to 3 solutions that were most frequently mentioned. Using a workflow, you'll document the steps involved in using those solutions to address your customer's problem. Once again, you'll want to confirm your understanding of these steps before proceeding. And you can do this easily through direct observation by having 2 or 3 potential customers show you how they themselves solve their problem using one of the methods that's been most frequently mentioned. While you observe them actually executing the solution and applying that existing alternative, you'll capture the cost involving the solution in terms of monetary cost, time cost, and quality costs. You'll use these costs to determine which steps are most costly to your customers. Using a solution ideation process, you'll develop a solution hypothesis based on the identified weaknesses with existing alternatives, and now you have the ability to quantify which ones to exploit, which of your competitors' weaknesses that you're going to exploit. Using your solution hypothesis, you'll document the steps your customers will take to use your solution in solving their problem, as well as the associated costs. This will enable you to perform a relative value analysis to compare your hypothesized solution to existing alternatives to quantify whether your solution is substantially better and will lead your customer to switch to your product or service. The goal for your hypothesized solution is to be at least 80% better than existing alternatives based on the relative value index score. In the last activity to achieve the milestone of a compelling problem found, you'll analyze your key results from all prior activities and determine next steps based on whether you've achieved your OKRs. This is where you're going to perform the fatal flaw analysis that I mentioned earlier, and something you should be working on with an advisor. And if you don't have access to an advisor, message me and we can try to help you out. So to start this activity, you're going to answer the following questions. Do you have a revised problem hypothesis and defined customer segment that has been validated through customer interviews? Do you have a solution hypothesis that is 80% better than existing alternatives when you do the relative value analysis? Is it feasible for you to build your solution based on your budget and access to technical resources? If you answered yes to each of these three questions, then you'll proceed to the next milestone of the channel discovered. So what happens if you're unable to answer yes to one or more of these questions? Let's take them one at a time. Remember the fatal flaws that we talked about in previous episodes? Well, they're back. Your product idea suffers from the first fatal flaw if any of the test conditions are true. Let's go test number one. And this comes from your interview notes, where you're reviewing whether 50% or more of interviewees indicate that they have the hypothesized problem you're attempting to solve. If you're unable to validate your problem hypothesis through customer interviews, this indicates that existing alternatives may be good enough, which means you have three possible corrective actions to take. Number one, you'll need to narrow your market segment definition to locate a higher concentration of potential customers who are suffering from the problem you've identified. Number two, you can find the next problem to pursue for the same market segment that you're targeting. You'll start by reviewing your customer interview notes to identify the next problem to solve for the same customer segment. So as an example of this is back with Twitter. As the concept of microblogging that Twitter became, it grew out of customer observations from the founder's original idea, a syndicated podcasting service called Audio. People wanted to talk about the podcasts, and that's where Twitter came from. Now, you'll repeat your customer interviews based on your new problem hypothesis in that second corrective action. Now, the third corrective action you can take is you can find the next market segment for the same problem you originally identified. Once again, you'll repeat your customer interviews with your next hypothesized customer segment. Remember the example of Netflix's failed Qwikster service that I introduced earlier? This is an example of the flaw cause being that existing alternatives are good enough or better. So in that case, what could Netflix have done differently? It eventually figured out that they just needed to keep the deal that they already had in place for those customers who had chosen to opt in for DVD service for an extra $2 per month and keep it in place for 6 months more for those who joined 6 months prior to the new policy. The thing is, not thinking through the transition costs for Netflix, it cost them 800,000 subscribers, or the equivalent of $7.2 million in lost revenues each month. The lesson learned here is that you need to make sure your product offering is better than existing alternatives, especially when the alternative is your own existing product or service. Your next test is after you've completed your relative value analysis and determined that you cannot achieve an RVI of 0.8 or greater. And 0.8 reflects that 80% improvement over existing alternatives. Now, in this case, the cause is that no workable solution hypothesis will help you change the current state sufficiently enough to warrant moving forward. In other words, your solution won't be better than existing alternatives, causing you to suffer from a Me Too solution, something that just kind of drags on. Your corrective actions at this point are either to invent the technology necessary to make your solution hypothesis workable, or you can seek out or even wait for technology enablers that will aid you in solving the problem. You can look at real-world examples of the second corrective action in the rapid development and adoption of electric vehicles due to scientific advances in battery charging speeds and storage capacity with the application of new materials. So let's return back to the earlier Burger King example with its failed Satisfy products. In those, that Satisfy product ended up suffering from the first fatal flaw, where the cause was no workable solution hypothesis. Even though Burger King knew it had no workable solution hypothesis that would result in a better situation for its customers, remarkably, it launched a new product that was guaranteed to fail. The lesson learned here is that you should never move forward with a solution hypothesis that you know is not better than existing alternatives. Otherwise, you might as well plow your product development dollars into scratch-off lottery tickets because you're more likely to have a better chance at being successful with those. Okay, during our next workshop, we're going to examine the second market validation milestone, where you'll discover the channel you'll use to reach and activate your customer prospects. We'll also identify the activities you need to perform and the tools you'll use so you can efficiently complete this milestone. Now, before we jump over to Qwikster to answer your questions, if you're looking to change how you grow your startup by building lean and you find these workshops helpful, please subscribe to this YouTube channel and click the notification bell nearby, as well as drop us a like or even a positive comment. Also, if you know of other founders or product managers who could benefit from our workshops, please share this video with them so they too can build their startups lean and avoid mistakes that cost time and money. Building Lean is brought to you by the Lean Mastery Incubator. Unlike other incubators or accelerators that rush you to pitch to investors whether you're ready or not, Lean Mastery guides you in building key business functions that turn up revenues fast, which puts you in the best position to successfully raise money and outrun your competition. Learn more about how you can become a Lean Mastery Incubator member at leanmastery.co. Thank you all for watching, and now over to Qwikster to get us started with answering your burning startup questions.
Hi everyone, Qwikster here. Now that you know why finding a compelling problem for a defined set of customers is the first milestone in getting through market validation phase, we're going to pivot to answering questions submitted by founders like yourself. But before we do, I want to remind you to subscribe to our YouTube channel somewhere over here with Steven's Magic, as well as click on the notification bell so you can gain immediate access to our latest episodes. All right, Steven, are you ready with our first question?
All right, hey there, Qwikster. I do have our first question, and it's a perfect one to kick off this edition of Founders Forum, as you and I both have had similar questions asked of us by founders during our live events. So this founder is pretty early in his journey as he's at the beginning of market validation. And his question is, I did my customer discovery using surveys and got a decent response from doing that, which confirmed my hypothesis about the problem that I was solving. But when I went to use the survey results to build my initial marketing campaign, it didn't work out. What am I doing wrong here?
Oh, where to start on this one? Okay, so the problem with surveys is unless you're trained in the science of survey design, you can easily create confirmation bias in the results. That means the data you've collected gave you a false positive about the validity of your hypothesis. So in our experience, founders make this mistake using surveys to gain insights. And of course, surveys aren't designed to help you gain insights. They're designed to measure the frequency of occurrence within a target population of any given question. And my assumption underneath that is the survey you're using has multiple choices, and they're not open-ended questions. We don't consider open-ended questions as surveys. They're just another form of customer discovery, but not nearly as effective as in-person or face-to-face discovery, even if it's remote. So surveys are best used to confirm the frequency of insights you gain through customer interviews or direct observation techniques discussed by Steven at the beginning of this workshop. Now, my answer assumes you did the survey incorrectly and the results you received were of little or no value. However, it could also be that you did the survey correctly, but didn't know how to use the results for generating your marketing campaign. So in other words, your messaging failed to create awareness of the problem with users and, more importantly, failed to get them to act, which means you may understand the problem correctly, but your user surveys fail to at translating that understanding into an actual message that can activate your target customers. The best method for detecting where the failure in your process is by performing the existing alternative analysis. that Stephen mentioned in the workshop. So if your message clearly aligns with the problem with existing alternatives, then likely you understand the problem incorrectly. I know you're thinking, how can that be? My messaging is clearly describing a problem with existing alternatives. How can I understand the problem incorrectly? Well, the difference is in the perception versus the reality of the problem. And what we mean by that is perception relates to how customers, the language and the words customers would use to describe the problem, whereas the reality is what you would use and describing it in technical terms. So you're likely describing the problem, describing the reality of the problem, which in our experience usually means you're using the technical language to describe the problem, whereas your target customers have a completely different perception of how they experience the problem. So let's look at a quick example. Let's see, we're recording this around 9 a.m. in the morning. So I know right now Stephen is ready for his second breakfast. So even though Stephen looks like a really tall elf, he really is a hobbit when it comes to eating habits. So if you had a great breakfast item to sell, you wouldn't create awareness of your product by saying, Stephen, gastrointestinal tracts feeling empty? Try our gastro nutrition bar. I would kind of like not get Stephen to respond much because he wouldn't know what the hell you're talking about. Now, the language I use, of course, gastrointestinal tract feeling empty means he's hungry, right? So while the above is technically accurate, it's not very hobbit friendly. Instead, you might try something like this. Looking for that perfect second breakfast snack? Try our Sleepy Hollow mushroom bars. Just one bite and you can last until the 11Zs. So to summarize, to summarize my answer, instead of using surveys, try customer interviews. And if your messaging is not working, pay attention to the language you use in your message. Make sure the words are the same as those used by your customer and aren't filled with technical jargon. Stephen, you have anything to add to my explanation around technical jargon?
Yeah. Joke's on you. I already have my second breakfast waiting off camera. So, haha, already got it. Okay. Yeah. So there would be something I'd like to add. Founders who are watching this, y'all got to remember that the customers want to know how your product or service is going to make their life better for them, not how your product works using technical jargon, just as Shafiq described. So let's go with one more example. It kind of came to my mind as I was listening to Shafiq. So take it as an example, you're selling to a mom, and the mom, and you have an electric car startup. So the mom wants to know that the electric car that you're trying to sell to her is either safe, reliable, or cost less, especially compared to her other options. Frankly, she's not interested in knowing that your electrical motor has 25,000 windings, because that technical detail won't be what wins you any favors with that mom. It's not because she doesn't understand the technical aspect of it. It's just that's not the problem she's worried about. If you think about it another way, as founders, we're so engrossed in our startup idea, especially our solution, and we often surround ourselves with teammates and advisors who are also consumed by the same topic. We kind of have a tendency to become myopic and really consumed with our idea altogether. So Shafiq, you provided a great dissection of how to understand what may not have worked for this founder who chose to go the route of surveys over interviews during customer discovery. But the part that I'd like to emphasize most of all that founders really need to pay attention to what you said, which is it's important that founders remember their customer's point of view. Okay, we have our next question here, Shafiq, and this one comes from a founder with previous startup experience who's starting a new venture. And let's see, while he likes the Building Lean series, he still doesn't quite understand our emphasis on the scientific approach. So his question is, you guys keep talking about hypotheses, assumptions, and experiments like we're still in science class. I'm just trying to build my business. I don't get why I need to waste my time coming up with a hypothesis. It's not like I'm trying to invent a cure for a disease.
Okay, so the scientific approach question, that's a great one. So, well, let me speak from my own experience. After having started 7 businesses over 20 years earlier in my career, I learned firsthand the perils of winging it and going on gut feel. And what I mean by that is, I got lots of scraped knees, okay? I fell down hard and lost lots of money. So while my instincts have been useful to me in times of stress, they are no substitute for analyzing data and basing a decision on real evidence from the marketplace. So our whole process is based on using the scientific approach, because making business decisions on instinct can lead to catastrophic financial consequences on the business. And again, I can personally testify to that, having done that earlier in my career. That is why we emphasize the scientific methodology and specifically treating everything you currently believe but don't have any evidence of as a hypothesis. Your task is to quickly figure out how, if your hypothesis is true, which means you need to set up a defined experiment that will help you validate your hypothesis, in which case you can move forward with confidence that your decision is based on real market data and not just gut instinct. Or you will invalidate your hypothesis, but in the process learn the insights you need to formulate your new revised hypothesis that helps you rethink your go-forward plan. So back to the different aspect of your business and the assumptions you have made. Let's kind of enumerate through them. If you don't have any customers and are building a product, then you have assumed you're solving a compelling problem for your target customers. And you've also assumed that you can reach your target customers, and you understand that the price they're willing to pay to have you solve the problem for them. And you've also assumed that you can solve the problem in a way that is going to make it worthwhile for customers to switch to your solution, and that it is technically feasible for you to solve the problem in a compelling way, and that you can help your customers adopt the solution fast. And finally, you can scale the marketing, selling, and production and delivery of your product fast. All these assumptions need to be validated. And the best and most optimal method for validating these assumptions is to use the building lean process that we've outlined in this series of workshops, because there is no faster, cheaper method that we're aware of that you can consistently use to convert an idea into a thriving business with sustainable growth rates. So that is why we emphasize the scientific approach. It helps you avoid costly mistakes while helping you build out the key business functions fast, while detecting and eliminating the fatal flaws inherent in every initial business idea. Stephen, would you like to add your thoughts on how the building lean process helps refine great idea, the ideas that seem great on paper into one that actually work in the marketplace?
Yeah, and I think you're being modest about your experience, because you've had some tremendous successes, and I know the ones that the startups that you've had the most success with, it's that discipline you guys have had relative to following a scientific approach. So what comes to mind to me is when founders ask us, because it happens, quite often, they ask us about our use of the scientific process, especially when they're applying to our incubator and they're considering joining our incubator over other incubators and accelerators. I noticed that their question related to the scientific process comes from a place of wanting to enjoy the art of building their startup. So I've actually thought a lot about that perspective, as it makes a lot of sense from the founder's point of view. So in my perspective, the science and art of building a business are not mutually exclusive. And for that matter, great artists, when you think about it, throughout world history and even now, they study the underlying science of their medium of expression. And they do that in pursuit of mastery, which frankly is why you and I chose the name of our incubator as the Lean Mastery Incubator, as we believe great startups are built based upon the founders' mastery of lean processes, which in turn enables those founders to use their own artistic approach when creatively expressing their startup idea in terms of marketing, sales, product development, customer adoption, scale, all those critical business functions and capacity. And I think that message really resonates with the founders we've talked about, because we seem to have a good hit rate with people who had applied to the incubator and joined, because they recognize the clear value of following a dedicated scientific approach helps them to achieve their dreams. Okay, all right, last question here, Qwik. And This one comes from someone a bit different than the founders who've been submitting questions to us so far. All right, so brace for this one. This question comes from an enterprise IT project manager who's responsible for internal innovation. So now, just like the person who submitted the previous question, she does love our new Building Lean series as well as our agile approach to developing new solutions. So the scientific approach issue, probably not so much of a problem for her. What she is struggling with is she's struggling to figure out how best to apply what we cover here to the internal projects that she manages, especially when it comes to funding and prioritizing initiatives as part of her process to filter which projects to focus on. So her question is, you guys previously talked about relative value analysis. Can you tell me how it's different than the ROI analysis that we currently use?
Oh, wow. Okay, so, well, there are many ways of performing an ROI analysis, and depending on the project and how much data you have available to accurately describe the current state as well as the future state, you need both to figure out the difference between the two states in terms of dollars in order to figure out the savings, which then to figure out the ROI, you take the savings divided by the investment required, and there you have the ROI calculation, right? As well as a time frame on which that ROI occurs, because obviously the savings happen over time, and time is a function of the ROI. So in a nutshell, the ROI is focused on financial implication of any given project. The RVI, on the other hand, is focused on figuring out the difference in four different dimensions. Specifically, it is focused on the money spent, time spent, quality issues, and completeness issues related to any existing alternatives. In an ROI, you try to assign values to time savings as well as quality issues. However, we think that is counterproductive because time savings should be desirable on their own regardless of their financial impact. So if a project can reduce the time spent completing an activity from 3 days down to 1 day, even though the effort required in labor is the same, trying to assign a dollar value to that time reduction is an ad hoc exercise at best. In today's world, the faster things happen, the more competitive an organization becomes in their ability to keep the competitors from stealing business. So how do you assign a dollar value to time reduction when it involves retaining business and retaining clients? You're kind of throwing your thumb up in the air and you're coming up with some value that may be accurate but likely is just a guess and leads to more questions than it answers, right? And that's why a lot of those kind of things get left off, because they're not direct, tangible things that you can measure and turn into dollars and cents. And then the same is true for quality issues. The less things that go wrong from an existing state, the better off the organization is for a whole set of factors, from employee retention to customer adoption and all kinds of things within the operation. So smooth running processes within an organization should be the preferred state. The RVI analysis does not try to quantify the financial cost of quality issues, but rather the degradation of the user experience. If the degradation is sufficient enough, and by user we mean stakeholders, right? Whoever is involved in this internal project and the stakeholders, and how their experience is degraded due to quality issues. If the degradation is sufficient enough and often enough, then you can count it as a meaningful change you're helping to make in the life of your customer, even if they are internal customers within the organization. The same is true for combining several different solutions into one coherent process. So the ROI analysis is much richer than a typical ROI analysis and avoids the ad hoc conversion of time and quality issues into dollars and cents. Stephen, now if my memory serves, you're the financial nerd we have on our staff, so would you like to add your thoughts to our ROI versus RVI analysis?
I think you have this really well covered, actually, but with my notes, I'd say the one thing I'd like to add is, especially for someone like the person who submitted this question, as she regularly uses an ROI calculation in her work, it's that the relative value analysis is great at normalizing data, simplifying how to compare project value, and resulting in a balanced approach. So if you think about it, in a typical ROI analysis, non-monetary values, just as Shafiq described, non-monetary values are either ignored, or a monetary value has to be ascribed to the non-monetary inputs. And what this does is this creates more risk that the ROI model will produce errant results due to the increase in variables being added when translating the non-monetary assumptions into monetary costs. So let's take it as an example. If a startup offered a product to help dog owners clean their dogs better and faster, how would an ROI calculation account for the time saved for a dog owner? And for that matter, in this example, how would a founder ascribe value to the time saved for, say, a stay-at-home mom who's now faster at keeping the family pet clean? Well, most models would equate zero value to this mom, as the mom is not financially compensated for all of her efforts to take care inside the home, to take care of the household and all of that. Even though real value is being created that has a real impact on that mom's schedule, especially if that additional hour of free time each week can be used for a mom to relax. Okay, everyone, as a reminder, in addition to our regular incubator process, we're offering a special cohort for our incubator coming up. If you have ever tried to run a Kickstarter campaign and failed, or had a successful campaign but failed to continue selling your product post Kickstarter campaign, or are thinking about running a brand new Kickstarter campaign, especially this fall or next spring, you're going to want to apply to the Lean Mastery Incubator by August 15th so you can join our Kickstarter cohort. Spots are limited, and we will use a rolling admission process. And what that means, by the way, is we're seeing some tremendous applications coming in. So really also means that the quicker you apply, the better chance you'll have to gain one of these coveted incubator spots. The Kickstarter cohort will start on September 1st, 2020. To learn more about the Lean Mastery Incubator Kickstarter cohort and apply, visit leanmastery.co/Kickstarter. You guys are not going to want to miss out on this, so get your applications in today. Thank you all for watching this episode of Building Lean, and we look forward to helping you be successful in pursuing your startup dreams by building lean.